Hello, welcome to the Creative Resistance Podcast. I'm Scott Cassidy, and this episode sees me chatting to the ever-ace Kirsty Strang-Roy. Now, Kirsty is a phenomenal writer, a bookseller and a creative facilitator based in Glasgow. Her creative practice and her ability to hold space and build community sees her tackle the big topics: grief, connection, the body, amongst others, with deftness and a positivity pulled from deep-rooted personal trauma. True creative resistance. Now, I'm lucky enough to call Kirsty a friend, and it was a real privilege to pluck ourselves out of the group chat, sit down and dig deep. And I hope you enjoy the conversation. Very warm welcome to the Creative Resistance Podcast to Kirsty Strang-Roy. How are you, pal?
I'm good, pal. It's nice to see you.
It's great to see you. Just to give some context, so Kirsty and I are in her beautiful writing cabin. Is that the right thing to say?
Yeah.
Writing cabin in the south side of Glasgow. This is the first ever in-person, on-the-road episode. So bear with me, Kirsty, and thank you for sort of hanging around while I set up all this kit that I have no clue how to use.
It's been fascinating.
yeah, that's one word for it. So obviously this is audio only, but we have microphones on top of boxes, on top of tables. We have cables, we have phones and all kinds of stuff, but we are doing a backup, so hopefully it will work. So yeah, bear with me. Are you comfy enough to
I'm good.
crack
I'm good
on?
to go.
Grand. Okay, so the audience will have heard a little bit about you already, so we're going to get fired straight into explore your creativity, your own writing, your facilitating, and the process that you use. So just to get started, what did creativity look like for you before you did your degrees, before you were facilitating workshops or writing your own books? And I'm really interested, like, was there a specific place or feeling that first made you realise that stories were how you were going to navigate the world?
Do you know what's really lovely is I've never given that much thought before you've asked me that question, which is quite a sure sign that I kind of always did live quite creatively, I think. And if I try and root it in something, I think for me, sort of being creative has always been quite a kind of outdoor pursuit or an outdoor practice. So I was lucky enough, I was brought up in a little village in Aberdeenshire, and our house like backed onto a forest or like just a little copse. And I spent a lot of my time out there as a kid, kind of picking up sticks, picking up pebbles, just being quite present in the world. And I was dead fortunate in that my mum was a drama teacher.
Okay.
And then latterly a drama lecturer at Aberdeen University, which I have to say, shout out to mum, is amazing. She had my big brother when she was 18 or 19, never went to uni, never got to do any of that stuff, but wound up being a lecturer and had all these amazing like creative insights, creative friends. We had books all over the house. So I do feel really fortunate that I grew up, you know, in that environment.
You're fully immersed in this kind of creativity and conversations around creativity as
yeah,
well.
Totally. And her friends were quite present in our life, you know, and they would always be doing that. My dad, on the flip side, is a physicist, an astrophysicist by training, and he's dead sciencey, he's quite forensic. But if I try and kind of trace it back, if I look at what I write about now, a lot of it is that kind of deep ecology stuff. Mm-hmm. It's not surprising when you look at that lineage, you know, growing up in the woods, having that balance of kind of creative mum and this like really forensically engaged dads. And that to me is that creative practice I've always carved out for myself, is that kind of, that sciencey, creative sciencey, just being and being present.
Yeah, I love that. Were you aware that you were being creative as a kid, or was that just the world that you inhabited and just went about? Like, were you making up stories at that point? Were you kind of piecing together a kind of an imaginative world, so to speak?
Yeah, totally, but not in a conscious way. I think, you know, I work with kids a lot, and a quote I use whenever I'm talking to folk about working with kids is a Louise Gluck the poet, the Louise Gluck quote.
Amazing.
She's absolutely amazing. And the quote is, we look at the world once in childhood, the rest is just memory. And I think that is so correct. Like, the way kids navigate the world is inherently creative, because it's driven by a sense of wonder, but they're not mindful of trying to create something as well. So I think, like, it was quite a creative way to be brought up, but I didn't know how lucky I was as well.
Yeah, which is great, actually. That's what you want as a kid, to be playing with that thing. It's interesting what you said about memory, actually. This is a total aside, but it's relevant. On the drive through here, I was listening to a podcast interview with a journalist and writer called Michael Pollan. He does a lot about like psychedelics and consciousness and things. And he was talking about how there's a theory out there that you remember something once, but then every time you dip back into that memory, you change it slightly. So I think as a kid, being able to lay down some really rock solid, creative, good memories means every time you dip back in, hopefully you're building on something positive, which I love.
What a better metaphor for the creative process than that.
Totally.
Just, recreating things over and over again. I think that's bang on. And I think, we can talk about my writing in a bit, but I do write a lot about rocks and moss and sticks and just being in the woods.
Yeah.
And that is a total kind of mining or excavation of my own childhood. Like again and again, that's definitely what it is. And, it's no surprise my kids go to an outdoor forest school because I wanted them to have that as well. It was just such a brilliant way to grow up. And I feel, really privileged and really lucky to have had that for sure.
I love that. It's a seamless segue onto what I wanted to speak to you about next as well. Because I think one of the things that struck me, like, obviously, for anyone listening, like Kirsty and I are pals outside of this podcast. We've known each other for a while. So I know Kirsty's writing process quite well. And one of the things that always struck me is that you aren't a kind of writer who's just sat writing on your own. Sort of play and place like help shape the writing and the workshops and the facilitating you do. And I'd love to know a bit more about that because I think it's quite unique. So I'd love to know more about the techniques. So using playlists, dancing, outdoor walks that you use when you're working with others, and also how they shape your own writing practice.
God, yeah, that's massive. I think play, to pick out one of those words, play is probably at the heart of everything I do, like trying to regain this sense of being playful with our creative practice. So when I'm facilitating, I'm quite often basing it on play theory. Like my mum was a teacher. I'm married to a teacher. I'm a bit of a throwball girly, and I love this idea of kind of learning through play. So throwball, for anyone who doesn't know, developed this idea of the kindergarten. He's the one that developed that, which literally means children's garden. And it's the sense that the whole world should just be this arena for us to explore and learn through playing all the time. And I do try and bring that to everything that I do. So in terms of facilitation, and I'm not talking about like cringy 90s icebreakers. That's not what it is. I'm talking about trying to create a kind of collaborative, co-creative environment all the time. And I just think that's really good for folk. We're socialised out of playing as adults. We're taught not to do it anymore. But we all have that experience of when we're on a night out and we're dancing, or if we pick up a football and we play football again with our pals, it feels really good because it touches back to something that we used to do and that we don't do anymore. So I try and bring that energy a little bit to whatever I'm doing. And I think it's a kind of like, it's a bit of a leveler for folk. Like play is collaborative, right? That's the whole point in it. So when you bring that to a workshop environment or a writing environment, it means people stop worrying about the hierarchy and they stop worrying about winning. They're just there to kind of be and to enjoy it. And I just think what can be more radical actually than doing that? And it's process, and I know you've talked a lot with other folk about this, about process over product. But in today's sort of product-driven environment where we're relying on sort of end-stage capitalism to define our worth, rooting it back in a process is so important. And it just makes you feel pretty, well, for me, it makes me feel pretty vitally alive to be part of that.
Do you get much pushback from people? Like people that are signing up for a writing workshop that come along thinking I'm going to be sitting in silence, I might have to share some of my work, and that's scary. How do they react when they realise that it's going to be fun and playful and kind of more physically sort of present rather than just in their heads?
Do you know what? I haven't encountered much kickback, and I thought I would, but actually what I encounter is gratitude. I encounter people being really grateful to have a space where they can just be again, and they can be a little bit silly and they can kind of explore things in a different way. And I think, it's interesting you mentioned the kind of sharing of work. I'm very clear with writing workshops, you're never going to be expected to share anything unless you really want to.
Okay.
Because I don't think, and I just fundamentally don't think the product is what's important. I think the learning comes from the process. It comes from playing on the page. It comes from getting things wrong as well. One of my favourite phrases is the Samuel Beckett, the fail again, fail better.
Love that
is so great. And that again is just so important. Like if you're focusing on getting it right, that's when that inner critic kind of kicks in as well. Like you just, it's just no good for anyone. Yeah,
I've seen, I can't remember where it was, but I've seen you mention before about the importance of a kind of a messy practice rather than it just being like completely, striving for that kind of polished draft every time. Do you find that the playfulness helps people, almost gives them permission to be messy, to be a bit more open and just get words out before they then try to polish them?
Yeah, definitely. I do a lot of collage work to open workshops. So I've got a big box, you can see it behind me there, collage materials. Things like that, breaking it down from breaking it down into quite an active participatory process, I think is really important. I think,
You get outside as well, don't you? Like
I
you'll
do.
actually get workshops, you'll gather, you'll get people outside creating kind of in nature.
Yeah, definitely. Mostly with children at the moment. I do a lot of outdoor collaborative poetry where I'll have kids go and literally gather objects, you know, kind of like that childhood I was describing. We'll go and gather objects, we'll find ways of describing them, then we'll bring them together in a kind of collaborative piece that I see as kind of active participatory placemaking, I guess. It's a way of exploring how this quite itinerant group are existing together in a space.
Ah, that's beautiful.
It's so nice, yeah.
Big difference doing it with kids or adults, or do you find that the end result's quite similar?
Kids are easier.
Oh, really? Yeah, because they don't have the inhibitions.
Yeah, totally. Kids just I remember asking, well, I always ask kids workshops, you know, what is a poem? And I wrote about this. I know you've read this essay before, but I asked kids, you know, what is a poem? And the best answer I ever got is a poem is nature. Oh, and I'm like, yeah. How
profound is that?
Actually, I think you're right.
Yeah.
You know, it's this distillation of like an immediate experience of where you are. So kids, they don't have the inhibitions and they're more collaborative. Mm-hmm. They just want to kind of get on with it and have fun while doing it.
And tactile as well, aren't they? Like that, like you said before, that sort of tactile play is so important, isn't it?
Definitely.
Love that. So moving away from that kind of nice, cheery, playful, we're going to go dark.
Okay,
the next question. So I think I was trying to think about when we first met. I think we knew each other just from kind of the wider sort of writing scene and Instagram, and then I think we kind of connected because we were both writing on Substack back when it was new, before it went all kind of Nazified, as has been in the press this week, which we were speaking about before. Hot topic, yeah. And just to be clear, I don't think for a second that Substack as a platform has gone Nazi, but I think it did feel at one point like it was this secret little corner of the internet where people were engaging and creating and collaborating, which was really lovely. And I think we first met when we were both trying to sort of untangle feelings around grief in our own writing, as we started to map out the geography of our loss in very sort of different circumstances, but definitely common threads. And that kind of grief feeling can be crushing, it can be silent in the way that you feel. But I definitely felt like personally that in writing about it, I was resisting that, or at least taking ownership of it. And I'd love to know a little bit more about why you write about grief and how that works for you.
Yeah, totally. Do you know, it took me a long time to kind of accept and celebrate that a lot of the best parts of myself and the best parts of my creative practice come from trauma and come from really difficult things. Yeah. So when I was 13, my little brother died. He was 10. He died in quite a freak accident. He was out playing in the snow. So you can imagine as a 13-year-old girl, that's pretty mega stuff.
My daughter's 14 and I can imagine, it's such a pivotal
your
age,
brains, you're at a very particularly kind of plastic point in your life. There's a lot of hormones kicking in, and just trying to grow up in Presbyterian Northeast Scotland as a young girl has its own things. So, you know, that, and for me, that's my entire life has been that lived experience. And it's difficult to articulate that the best parts of yourself come from something so horrible. I think we live in this we're still living in a kind of post-Victorian grieving culture where people expect you to be, you know, metaphorically veiled and shrouded, and to treat death as something really horrible that you don't talk about or that you reserve for kind of antiquarian rituals, you know. But for me, I had to make it something else. It had to become something positive. And I think, you know, if I look at what was happening when Peter died, I had to turn to kind of creativity and reading and writing to kind of get through that. And that's been quite a long running thing in my life. And I just genuinely, as cliched as it sounds, I wouldn't be who I am today if I hadn't been through that. And my kind of metric of creativity, the metaphors I use, everything that I'm interested in comes from that kind of excavation of the grieving process. And I'm really proud of that. I think it's a really beautiful kind of alchemy to turn something so shitty into something so positive, you know? Yeah, no,
I think it's amazing. And that's a really beautiful way to look at it. And I'm so sorry that you had to obviously deal with that. It's horrific. But can I just check so that kind of swing towards those immense feelings of grief and everything that bubbled up with that, to that creative response, was that something that you and your family did naturally? Was that something that you were sort of handheld to do? You know, because I know that certainly nowadays there are people, there are charities out there that would have come in and helped you with that and guided you towards, you know, how to process your trauma. Was that the case back then or not?
Not really. And I think that is because of the times. I don't think it's anyone's fault. You know, my parents were going through an immensely horrible, difficult thing. They
The
did
worst
what they
thing.
could. Yeah, literally the worst thing.
Yeah.
I now have kids. It's the worst thing you can ever imagine.
Yeah.
And we also had two different experiences. I lost a sibling. They lost a child. Those are different things. So I did go to sort of some counselling. The school did their best to try and get me some like art therapy and stuff, but there wasn't really a conscious, let's channel this. That came later. That came much later. But it's funny when I look at kind of what I write now and what I've written about it, the actual putting the pen to page came later, but I think a lot of it percolated. A lot of the kind of ideas, I've touched on the fact he died in snow. I think from as soon as that happened, that was 22 years ago.
Wow.
This month, actually, 22 years. So even our weatherscape was different back then. We had a lot more snow back then. So in the 20 years interim, I've had to watch Februaries come and go where there is no snow.
Yeah.
So I've spent 20 years trying to understand that, But the actual writing about it only really came about when I sort of consciously decided to. I think I went back, I'm trying to think my first kid was born in 2019 and then lockdown happened in 2020, like a few months later. And it was during that time I thought, you know what, I need to start exploring this properly. I need to start writing this story. Yeah. And it came really quickly as a fully fledged story. And it's now a kind of novella draft. It's been through various iterations, but it is a novella draft that sits in my computer. Yeah. Painfully unfinished.
And is the goal to finish that, to kind of bring that to it? Or does that feel doable, or does that feel like almost, are you nervous to finish it? Like, is there
There's both. Yeah, there's both. Like, I have loved being immersed in that story. So there'll be quite a lot of sadness, I think, when it's done. But at the same time, I feel, and the goal with writing it was always to get out there, because I always thought it would help people, to read that. So yeah, it's good. I've got a mentor who emailed me last week asking where it is. So it has to be finished soon. But everything I write, and you've touched on this, I no longer write on Substack, but everything I was writing on Substack was to do with grief and landscape and trauma.
It's interesting you say that, because sometimes, not obviously or not overtly, like I know that because I've read some of the more overtly stuff that's about grief, but the landscape stuff I don't think is necessarily that obvious that that's what it's about until you read other bits of your writing as well. And going back to what you said about you feel it would help people, I think it already has helped people. Like, well, we wouldn't be sitting here today if we hadn't had that shared experience. And just for anyone listening doesn't know, so my brother also died, but when I was just a baby, so it's a very different set of circumstances. I was 6 months old, he was 2, so I was almost writing about like the loss of something or the lack of something to grieve, so it was really interesting to read your kind of direct, kind of visceral feelings and thoughts about that time and everything that came afterwards. And I'm a big believer that getting these things out there, it does help. I think we just need to speak about these things more. We live like Scotland specifically has this really narrow-minded, like closed way of dealing with death.
Yeah, 100%. And I've kind of made a note here. I was trying to think about, why is it helpful to write about grief and write about bereavement? And I've kind of made a note here that loss creates a kind of permission. So when you've been the negative statistic, when you've been the 1 in 100 whatever 1,000 that awful traumatic thing has happened to, other things don't feel so bad. And it kind of recalibrates how you see this scale of like difficult things and traumatic things. And I also think like death, and particularly death of an infant, and I know you've lived this in your family environment, it really shakes your sense of meaning, because it feels so entirely wrong that an infant dies that your spectrum of meaning changes quite a lot in life. And as awful as that is, it's quite liberating as well. And I was trying to think, what impact has the grieving process had on my actual creative practice? I do write quite fragmented, sparse kind of prose poetry things. So I do wonder if there's a correlation there with lack of meaning and structure and trying to find it. Yeah. And that's liberating, and it's coming back to this tension between the worst thing that ever happens to you making you a better person. It's really interesting.
It's fascinating as well. I wonder though, like, I do wonder what happens to people when they don't have a way of processing that. Well, I don't wonder, you see it play out all the time. Like when people don't have a way of processing that or pull it together or kind of give some kind of structure to it, it's hugely damaging, isn't it? And I think it's quite positive though. There's definitely more conversations about death. There's a good friend of mine, Marika, who's just training to be a death doula. which I think is incredible.
Amazing.
Like there's a profession out there where you're actually helping people deal with the most difficult time in their life. And I think that's incredible. And I just think hopefully conversations like this, people writing about it do make a difference.
Yeah, they do. One of my kind of long-term clients is the Mental Health Foundation. And there's a reason they keep asking me to come back and do creative writing workshops. It's because it does. And I don't do sort of straightforward journaling. It's always through a lens of fiction or poetry. But I think it just helps you process and kind of buffer some of the harder feelings in life. Like it's not mind-blowing stuff. If you write it down, it feels better.
Yeah.
And again, it comes back to the value system we live in, though. Like we don't live in a world that values process. So people don't do it. They're like, well, what good's it going to do? It's frivolous to sit down with a notebook. Why should I do that?
They're looking for product. They're looking for a finished thing that will sell.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. When actually, like time and time again, I mean, therapeutic journaling is a massive thing, just writing anything down, any form of creative practice makes you feel better.
Yeah. And do you find that there are parallels then between that kind of processing of grief that you've done via writing and then actually supporting people with mental health writing as well? Do you think is it the same mechanism that's kicking into place?
Yeah, totally. Like it's the way I would refer to myself as a trauma-informed practitioner.
Okay.
That trauma-informed, nature's come through training, but it's also just by the nature of how I've, lived my life. And I just think, like I have emotional touchstones I can kind of use, but I also have a resilience, I think, that makes it easier for me to engage with people who've been through really, really difficult things. Yeah. And there's depth of feeling as well. I'm quite interested. We live in a society where, and again, it's a product, not to kind of soapbox about this too much, but the world we live in does feel quite ephemeral. And if we have discomfort, we quite often outsource that quite quickly. If you're hungry, you call a fast food joint, you get something to eat. If you want to watch something, you can watch whatever you want on TV. We're very quick to kind of solve our discomfort, that we don't find it that easy to sit with the difficult stuff and work through it. But I think there's huge value in doing that and taking the time with it. Do
you see yourself tackling that as a writer or a facilitator? Or do you see yourself moving into more kind of formal counselling training?
Never thought, but no, I don't think I would actually. I feel like what I'm doing at the moment, and I'm very fortunate enough to say this in my life, what I'm doing at the moment feels like exactly what I should be doing with my life. I think the facilitation stuff, the bringing people together, all of that is just hugely important to me and hugely beneficial.
Yeah, I love that. I think that bringing people together thing is huge. And I wanted to kind of chat a bit more about that. So as will probably become apparent from the conversation already, like I know you as both a writer and as a writing facilitator. And I've never been to any of your events, but I'm always blown away by this sort of sense and that feeling of community that runs through the groups that you work with. There's that stereotype, and we touched on it earlier, of writing as a sort of lonely existence, this sort of tortured creative sitting in a turret somewhere trying to produce a masterpiece. But you seem really able to hold a room and create a sort of brave space where people feel able to share. And I'd love to know a bit more about how you make this work for the masses when you're working with a group.
I just feel like, what's the point in creating if it's not with other people? I think that's just at the core of it. That is how I feel. We are storytellers. You kind of said that at the outset. We as human beings like to be part of a narrative. We like to be part of something bigger than ourselves. Well, most humans. We won't talk about the big humans in charge who don't feel that is important. But I just feel there's a real power in that. And it's just such a joyous thing. I think once you've had that experience of co-creating with people, there's nothing else like it in the world. And I think, Write Like a Girl is a big part of what I do. And I should mention just on the outset, Write Like a Girl, I run a kind of Glasgow arm of it. But Write Like a Girl started sort of 10 years ago with Dr. Kerry Ryan, who's a very dear friend of mine. And I was actually a student of hers years ago. That's where it all started from. And it's grown into this incredible kind of network. And yes, we do workshops, we do retreats, but it's a community, and that's at the heart of it. And so Write Like a Girl, for anyone who doesn't know about it, it's a series of workshops, but it's a way of supporting kind of all marginalised genders, of just supporting folk to develop a writing craft and confidence, like through community. That's really what we're doing. So we're gathering people in spaces to learn about writing, chat about books, and for the most part, just chat absolute nonsense. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful thing. We've recently moved into like an online forum as well for the first time. We were asked for quite a long time to do that. So we've just started that, and it's been gorgeous. It's been so lovely.
That's amazing.
To do that. You asked me how I do it. I don't know. I think it's alchemy. I think it's magic.
Yeah, I think it's coming through you rather than you doing it.
You just get good folk together.
You say that though. I think you're saying it's alchemy, but I don't think anyone can stand up and create that magic. I think there is something about being able to work with people, relate with people. It probably ties into the stuff we're speaking about before. Like you've been through stuff. You can empathise. You can feel what other people are going through, and maybe understand part of what's brought them there in the first place.
Yeah, I think so. I think specifically with Write Like a Girl, most of the people that are gathered there because they feel like society won't let them do that off their own bat. You know, people who are socialised female often has work commitments, they've got caring responsibilities, and they're also just living through misogyny and patriarchy that makes them feel like being creative is not a pursuit that they should be looking for. Yeah. They should be doing other stuff. So just turning up in that sense is radical. So holding that space, I know it's become quite a kind of cliched phrase, but really that's what you're doing, is you're holding that as a safe space for people to come exactly as they are and create exactly as they are. And I think the technicality behind that is just knowing your own self and approaching it in quite a dynamic way, being open to it being different every time. Yeah. But seeing the joy in that as well. You know, it's like an energy thing. Practically, I think I just make really stupid jokes and make cups of tea. Yeah,
cups of tea always help. But interesting, one of the things that you've come back to a few times in this, just in the last sort of 20 minutes, has been that that kind of process over product. And I wonder about the people that are coming to Write Like a Girl or any of the other sort of groups that you do. Are they coming in to be immersed within writing, or are they coming in with the kind of view of an end goal of walking out with a collection of poems or stories? What's the sort of demographic?
It's a real mix, and it depends what grouping it is. But for the most part, it's people who are just looking for some creative joy in their lives, looking for a space to make. It's like the level 1 course, there's no sharing of work, there's no kind of set end goal. The more advanced courses, there's a bit of a kind of work sharing component to it. But I think people just want to validate that impulse they have to make something, and they should feel validated in that. It's a really beautiful thing. You know, it's quite funny, I'm just thinking back to grief as well, and something we didn't touch on but it's just come into my head here. I think as well, for a lot of people, this is like an antithesis to the grief we're feeling about the way the world is as well. Like we're grieving a world we thought was safe, and we're also preemptively grieving the direction the world is going in as well, you know, under environmental collapse, polycrisis. Like it's all just really, really grim. So for a lot of people, just showing up and being together is a kind of salve for that. Yeah. And it's a way of tackling that kind of like empathy paralysis, if that makes sense. Like you just don't know what to do with your feelings, and especially if you're a creative person. So I think it's giving folk a space to process that as well.
Totally. And I think that ties in exactly with why I started and created this podcast. So I think creativity at its core is an act of resistance against that exact thing. It's interesting what you said before about, you kind of touched on the fact that some people maybe feel like it's difficult to give themselves permission to create. And it's a conversation I was having at home with Abby, my wife, yesterday. She's incredibly creative, like without any shadow of doubt, the most creative person I know. But she finds it incredibly difficult to give herself permission to go and spend that time to create sometimes, and actually it's really challenging because the world is just fast and it's coming at us. And I think the weight of everything that's going on is just huge. It's hard to know, like it's hard to give yourself time to create, but it's also hard to know what to create, you know, and how to actually tackle it. So I think bringing people together and that sense of community, it doesn't really matter what's on the page. It's about being in that space and actually acting together, isn't it?
100%. And just feeling supported. You know, it's a funny thing when you co-work with someone, when you co-create or just get together, it does have a kind of like physical impact on you. I don't know if you've had this sensation of just, or even when you go to like a poetry night, something happens to your nervous system and you just feel better, you know, and I don't know the ins and outs of it. And there's also a sense of like feeling yourself kind of, it's not just validation, it's hearing yourself echoed back as well, and knowing that you're not alone through all of this. It's just it's really important.
Definitely. It's interesting you said that, actually. The last episode, which will have gone out before this one, with Kat Cochrane, who's a Glasgow-based poet, we're speaking about the feelings in a room when you're at like a poetry night, or you're watching performance, or even an open mic. And we kind of came around to the fact that there's very few times when you are doing like proper active listening. You know, that you're sitting, you're engaged, there's nothing else to do. It's rude to have your phone in your hand and you're like listening to what's coming at you. You're aware that that person has crafted at it, they put time in, and you have to formulate your thoughts, I think, about a response, even if that's an internal response. But it's really rare that we have that now.
Yeah,
you know, because
definitely.
everyone's like got one eye on their phone whilst they're doing everything else. And I think anything that stops, forces you to stop and look up and properly listen is a beautiful thing, isn't it?
It is a beautiful thing, and it's my favourite when I'm running a writing retreat or I'm doing a workshop. I'll often not write. I find it too difficult to kind of straddle both those things. But I love just, this sounds really creepy, but I love just watching them and listening to them scribble. It's just magic, and I don't know, I can't capture, I wish I could bottle that feeling and give it to everyone, because it is just the best thing in the world.
Amazing. Love that. You mentioned in that last answer as well, you talked about storytelling briefly. And I think I've spoken about this to death in other podcasts and in various places, but I think storytelling and the ability to tell stories and create narratives, I think it's at the heart of what makes us human. It's what we can do that no other animals can do. And I think it's what we do to give value and give meaning to, you know, all aspects of our life. In your creative writing, you work with some of the oldest forms of storytelling. You touch on folklore, touch on mythology, and you use them to explore our place within nature, which I've spoken about before as well. So whilst timeless, these stories are always messy and evolving, and I wonder how they help you make sense of your place and your family's place in the world today.
Mm. Yeah, totally. I think for me, like just on a personal level, I'm really interested in nature and what nature has to teach us. And a lot of these early myths and fables come from that. They come from people trying to understand the world they live in by looking at natural rhythm and cycles. So my book is called Equinox, and it's about a grieving mother and daughter trying to understand that kind of immediate mess of grief right after an accident. And it's called Equinox because it looks at that cyclical nature of the seasons and things. And I think just for me, that kind of really immediate source material of a myth or fable is where we get to the real nitty-gritty of human emotion. It's like the basic touchstones of human emotion. And I could talk endlessly about this. I did a whole master's degree on this, on kind of monomyths and myth cycles, but I'm not a rich white American screenwriter, dude. So it's not my prerogative. And I'm also like allergic to structure at the same time. So I like for people to innovate these as well. But yeah, definitely some of my favorite books are kind of mythic rewritings, like Lanny, Max Porter is a kind of like state of the nation green man fable. You know, I love Louise Gluck, we've mentioned her Persephone poems. Anne Carson is a big user of all these myths and fables. Margaret Atwood, A.S. Byatt, all these people, they use myth in a way that's both universal but also like transgressive as well. I think there's something in taking a known structure and taking a known story and fucking it up a bit is really transgressive, and you can really make a point through that as well. So taking a structure someone understands and breaking it down can be really, really fun too.
And do you think there's like a universal sort of recognition when people do that and do it well? Like it's actually, because I genuinely believe that these stories, they're part of our DNA. Like they're so ingrained in who we are, and I think there's a recognition that comes, even if it's like in a modern adaptation of it. So do you find that when you're actually writing stuff that you're looking to tap into that immediate recognition? Yeah,
definitely. But I do think it's also innovating it as well. But yeah, I love it. And I love that kind of feeling of when someone's breadcrumbed a myth to you and you find it in a piece of work, you're like, oh yeah, that was really nice. I really like that. Like one of my favourite films when I was younger was the Coen brothers, Oh Brother Where Art Thou?
Okay,
which is the rewrite of the Odyssey, right? And it's just, I remember that dawning on me when I was a bit older, being like, oh my God, that's so good.
Did that dawn on you? So I don't think I'm well read enough to make those kind of connections myself. Do you find yourself clocking that's this myth or that's this story?
Yeah, but I also think they're just, even myths, even if they're separate myths, they're all versions of the same story. So there's a sense of like you can trace the same kind of story paradigm across every culture. We'll all have kind of like these hero tales or these kind of like great romances or these great tragedies. Like they're all versions of the same thing that are purely distilled human emotions, I think, you know? That whenever I'm teaching structure, people always ask me to teach structure. And what I tell people is like, you know it. I don't need to tell you this. We all like the same structure of story. It all comes from feelings. And I just think we quite innately know that, and we need to have more faith in ourselves to do that.
Oh, I love that.
As well.
I love that.
Is my cop-out of why I don't teach.
Yeah, but it's not.
No,
but
it's true. It's so true.
You're saying it's a cop-out, but it is so true. And I think, you know, moving from that sort of mythology thing that I think does run deep, and I think we do know those stories because it's human nature. But I also think folklore helps you feel rooted to a place. Like we were speaking before we started recording that, like, I live in a stupidly old little cottage in a little dip, and all of the names of the burns and the little dales and ditches all around us are all rooted in folklore, but it's repeated in all the different bits of the country, you know. And there's amazing sort of folk musicians set around where we are, so there's loads of source material to go and learn more about the area. And I think, you know, song, poetry, stories, they do help you make sense of where you live, even today, you know, when you're looking back.
Yeah,
do you find that as well?
Yeah, 100%. And it's just really fun to kind of magpie around all that and figure it out. You know, I'm from Aberdeenshire, and I remember reading Sunset Song. And I was probably one of the only kids at school who actually liked reading that book. It wasn't like, oh, what is this? What is this crap? But my dad, as I've mentioned, was like a scientist. So he was all about like deep time and geology, and, you know, like all good Aberdonians ended up working in oil, but was really into geology before that. And we grew up like around stone circles and stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember just being like, oh my God, there's such a depth of place where I am, and it's so layered and it's so complex. And why would you not want to explore that? Like, it's just so great. And all the place names, like you've said, and the local songs. And yeah, like I'm from a village called Torfins. And as far as I can understand, it comes from like my Gaelic. I do not have the Gaelic, but it's like Torfian, which means White Hills. Okay. And it's just the most like, what an evocative, beautiful thing.
Yeah. And there's a lineage there, isn't there?
Yeah.
That you can trace this back.
I don't know if you've been on the National Library's map website?
Okay.
Oh my God.
I've not, but I've been. Well, I don't want to derail your train of thought, but there's a website, I think is it Canmore, which like has these images of the land, which could be a nice one to look at with the maps, and it goes right back.
It's so great.
Yeah. Tell me about the maps.
Yeah, it's the map website. If any listeners want to lose an entire day or week of their lives, you can put in any postcode, and it'll give you every map ever recorded of that area, and you can just go back and back as far as you want. It's just incredible. Yeah. Even here where we're sat today, and we're in the south side of Glasgow, you can even look up here and see how it's changed over the years. It's just
I will do that for sure. Yeah, because there's loads of crazy history around where we are as well. Oh,
witch trials. The witch trial map is also awful.
The witch trial map is incredible, and we had a really sort of sobering day where we've got the deeds of our house that go back to like 1725, something like that, and it was. That's the earliest record of it, but that was the 11th time the house was sold, which is why we know the house goes back to the sort of 1600s. But we've got the names of all the different people, and you can tally them up with some of the names that are on the witch trial maps, which is just horrendous. I don't think there's anyone that necessarily lived in our house, but within the village, you know, you can see the names of the people who lived in the village, and we know who lived in our house at that time. And there's just something really striking when it puts a genuine human touch. You can see their name, you can see what they did for a living, and you're like, Jesus, it's not that long ago.
No, not at all.
Which is bonkers.
Not at all.
Yeah, it's terrifying. But also great that we can do that.
Yeah.
You know, internet has some good things to do. So we've covered loads so far. We've spoken about, obviously, grief, we've spoken about place, we've spoken about community, all of which I think fall under that kind of guise of resisting the kind of craziness in the world today. Like you said, the misogyny, the ruling classes who just don't give a fuck about anything. I think we are in the sort of death throes of a hugely destructive kind of capitalist world that I feel certainly that most people are totally oblivious to and just keep on consuming. And I do as well. We were speaking about this at home yesterday, how we know all the stuff, but you still do all the things. Like, still, if the kids need something for school on Thursday and it's Tuesday, I'm sorry, but it's getting bought from Amazon because they can get out. And I hate that we have to do that. But constantly trying to improve that. So we've got different creative ways to resist these things. I'm really interested what resistance means to you.
Do you know, it's so funny. When you were asking me this, my brain straight away went to the negative connotation of resistance, in that I'm going through a period of what I would call writer's block, kind of creative block. And for me, it's that I can feel my body resisting the creative acts. And I was trying to think, I was like, oh, that's quite a grim response. But I was trying to think of how can we reframe that? And actually, if I boil it down, it's harnessing that feeling of physical resistance to something and making it something more positive. So everything we've been talking about today, you resist by turning up, you resist by coming together physically, you resist by just being present in something in a world that makes you want to be not present, to be chronically online, to be away and distanced. So I think for me, resistance is showing up and being together. And I think I've been quite unsure of saying that to myself. I sometimes feel like, oh, that's a bit of a cop-out. Is that enough? But actually, what more can we do? Sometimes I think it is just showing up and being together and being collaborative is really, really beautiful. Learning to play again and just kind of finding the joy and stuff. Really,
it's a hugely powerful message in that, and play, community, not looking away, but actually standing together for a bit of sort of unity and strength, which is a really beautiful way to end the conversation. But I'd also love to know what's next for you. Like, we've spoken about a few projects that are open-ended.
I'm going to finish the book. I must finish the book. Writing a new novel as well. Just started writing that recently, and a few sort of short stories, of which you've been a really good beta reader. So thank you.
I love. Please keep them coming.
If anyone is interested in coming along to a course, I'm running a writing space and place course in March, which is going to be really good. We're going to explore a lot of what we talked about today, sort of time, borders, liminal space, that kind of thing. So
I'll put links in the show notes to that, to all the Write Like a Girl stuff. Where is the best place for people to follow you and what you do?
Shamelessly on Instagram. Chronically on Instagram. Yeah, say hello. I do love a random voice note. Even if I've never met you before in my life, I always like to get voice notes. So please feel free to get in touch. I'd love to. I do just genuinely love connecting with people. So please do.
Kirsty, huge thank you for the
Thank you.
conversation.
It's been lovely.
And thanks for the coffee and for the recording space in this beautiful cabin.
Anytime.
Nice one, pal. Thank you so much.
Thank you.